good afternoon or morning, I guess, depending on where you are. Welcome to The South's Got Something to Say, voter enfranchisement in the Deep South. My name is Ryan Nave. I'll be your moderator. I'm the editor-in-chief of Reckon, which is a newsroom for young Southerners building and imagining the future South. I'm currently in sunny Jackson, Mississippi, where I was a reporter and editor for 9 years before I relocated to Birmingham last year, which means I've had a front row seat to the amazing work that our panelists in their organizations have been doing for a long time. So how the conversation is going to go, I'll give some historical context for our conversation. We'll have the panelists introduce themselves and get into the discussion. I've been up since 5, so if y'all want to help me moderate by jumping in with questions, putting them in the chat at any time, I won't be mad at it. But we'll also set aside 10, 15 minutes at the end specifically for questions. So because I'm in Mississippi and 2 of our panelists are also in Mississippi, I want to start with Mississippi and the Constitution of 1819 to kind of frame the conversation. The Constitutional Convention that led to the Constitution in 1890 was designed specifically to exclude Black people from the franchise. They devised all the oldies but goodies that we all know and love: literacy tests, poll taxes. They also came up with a list of crimes that if you were convicted of them, you could also lose your right to vote, which, like maybe that makes sense to some people. Like if you're a murderer, like maybe you don't get a say in who gets to govern the rest of us. But actually, like in 1890, murder wasn't even one of the disenfranchising crimes. A few years ago, Mississippi State Supreme Court justice actually said the crimes we picked in 1890 were like kind of petty crimes that like Negroes are prone to, not the more, and this is a direct quote, robust crimes that white people do, like murder. And so we saw this all over the South. About 13 years earlier than that, the state of Georgia came up with a provision in its state constitution disenfranchising anyone who was convicted of crimes of moral turpitude. The state of Alabama did the same thing in 1901. A little bit after that, the state of Tennessee said that anybody convicted of any felony could lose the right to vote and pretty much disenfranchise all Black people. Fast forward through Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement, Voting Rights Act. These laws are still with us in the states that we all live and work in. And just to kind of like give some meaning to what it means, right now in Tennessee, more than 20% of Black adults can't vote because of felony conviction. In Mississippi, that's 11% of 11% of all Mississippians can't vote. About 16% of Black Mississippians can't vote, and y'all know how close a lot of these elections in southern states have been. And so, forgive me if my like basic Wikipedia research has like messed up anybody's stats, but that's where I want to jump off with the conversation. And so if we could have each panelist introduce themselves, your organizations, your role within the organizations, your pronouns if you want, and talk about kind of the unique challenges, because every state is a little bit different. Both to addressing and fixing this law, but also like just to doing the work that y'all are doing. And so we can start with, we don't have to start with Mississippi. Let's go to Tennessee first.
Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Jacola Lane. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Restore Your Vote advocate at Campaign Legal Center, and I am a native of Tennessee. I live in Nashville, and my whole family has been here for several generations. As RL said, in 1835 is where we first saw this appear in our state constitution, and it disenfranchised all Black people. And so including my ancestors. And so this is really important and close to my heart. We partner with a group called Free Hearts in Tennessee, who has been building out infrastructure across the state, led by formerly incarcerated women who did have their right to vote stripped from them in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee is very, very difficult when it comes to this process. We are the only state that requires child support to be up to date for you to be able to get your voting rights back. And so there's a very complicated process depending on when you were convicted, sometimes a type of a conviction. And so I'll leave it there, but you'll see a lot of similarities between these southern states that's on the call. Thanks for having me.
John Paul, can you introduce yourself and tell everybody what you're up against?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Paul Taylor. I am the Rights Restoration Director for Southern Poverty Law Center. I born and raised my life in Birmingham, Alabama, well, across the state of Alabama, honestly, growing up in the foster care system, which actually led me, a lot of my work has been surrounded with working with juveniles, particularly that was on probation and house arrest using the arts. That led me to wanting to do more and really seeing where a lot of the gaps were, becoming a fellow for the Alabama Voting Rights Project, which was a partnership between Southern Poverty Law Center and Campaign Legal Center, where after the 2017 law, More Turpitude Act passed in Alabama, which set a path for individuals to be able to restore their rights. It did not define what moral turpitude is. It created a list of disqualifying convictions. One of the components that's not on the list is any white collar crimes, right? And in 1901, the Alabama Constitution, they literally went on the record to say they was creating this document to help maintain white supremacy. They went on the record and wrote it down. That's how real and powerful it is. And to watch it really manifest itself still now, because even in the process, there's many individuals, because one of the requirements is fines and fees as a requirement to be able to get your serve certificate, which allows you, which says you've completed your sentence, allows you to have your rights restored. But as a requirement for that, like I say, there's a fine, fees, and restitution component to that. And that overwhelmingly, and across most of the states that I cover, overwhelmingly, that fines and fees component is one of the biggest hindrances for individuals, not just coming out of, because often when we talk about this space, we only want, a lot of people only talk about those that's formerly incarcerated. But actually, when you look at the felony conviction, there's actually 69, 70% of individuals that are not incarcerated that has a felony conviction, right? So really understanding what the day-to-day struggles are, is a lot of what I think all three of our organizations is really trying to not just get the vote, help individuals restore their right to vote, but help heal the whole person, right? And actually treat all of us like true citizens. And so that's a lot of the work really starting from the ground is a lot of the approach we're taking.
Give us the lay of the land in Mississippi, which, and I know you'll probably talk about this, but John Paul, you just touched on it. Sort of give us the lay of the land, but also like, I mean, we're all nerds, right? So we can get into the weeds a little bit. Talk a little bit about like the nuts and bolts of like what it actually takes to get your rights restored, and we'll go back around to the other panelists. But I don't know who wants to take it, Hannah or Rika.
Yeah. So, hey, y'all. Erika Bennett, she, her, Executive Director of Mississippi Votes. And just briefly, we are a youth civic engagement organization in Mississippi, which means that we are ran and led by young folks, Black folks from and of Mississippi. And before I get into the weeds of things,
I am Hannah Williams. I am the Voting Rights Project Coordinator.
Yeah. So a lot of Hannah's work, and I'm going to just pass it back to you, is centered around our rights restoration work. So Mississippi has 23 disenfranchising crimes. Many of them make absolutely no sense and obviously disproportionately affect Black and brown folks, particularly timber larceny. And we did some research around one of the disenfranchising crimes, the felony bad check one, and it obviously disproportionately impacts Black and brown women and folks who are taking care of children. And so Mississippi has a really wild process for restoring your right to vote. You either can be pardoned by the governor or become a bill of suffrage. Neither of those avenues ever see the light of day. Last year, you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this past legislative session, ourselves, along with another partner organization, submitted roughly about 51 applications for folks to get their rights restored to the Mississippi legislature. Out of 51 people, 20-something passed through one chamber to the next, but only 2 people were able to actually get their rights fully restored. There's no clear understanding about what the process is. It's not written down anywhere. It's not online. When you call the state capitol, you get transferred all over the switchboard because nobody really knows how to answer the question, including the legal department. And it's just a complicated process altogether. You have to come to Jackson, get a paper application. And as we know in Mississippi, we still have, we're still a majority rural state. So asking somebody to drive 2 or 3 hours from the Delta is just not realistic, or asking somebody to drive 2 or 3 hours from South Mississippi is just not realistic to get a piece of paper to try to restore your right to vote. So like we've done some things to try to help the process, like digitizing the application and putting it on our website, but there's still barriers because there's only so much that we can do, especially when we get questions from folks who have submitted applications and want updates on their application or want to know what the process is, and we can only explain it the way that we know how to explain it, and we don't even know if we're explaining it the right way. So we have a few things that definitely have to be worked through on the state level to understand how folks are even going to get their rights back.
Yeah. And so part of what we believe makes our partnership strong with the Campaign Legal Center and the Southern Poverty Law Center is because, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee got some really, really messed up laws around how to expand access to the ballot, not just to folks who have been disenfranchised, but folks generally don't know about the application process for suffrage, let alone the voter registration process in and of itself. And so each and every year, we face an uphill climb to not just do our work of voter education, but to make sure that people are safe in this process. And so we've decided to, work together to find avenues where folks who are directly impacted are leading the advocacy behind felony disenfranchisement. And we're following the lead of our brothers and sisters in Louisiana at VOTE and folks at the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. So that's pretty much like where we are right now. To Hannah's point, each and every legislative session, we also provide recommendations to the legislature to make the process a little more clear or change it, right? And so we've released several reports with those recommendations to no avail. But that's part of why we felt like this conversation, the South got something to say, was super important, because we do, right? So.
Yeah, it's, there's a lot of ambiguity in the process, but also in the law itself. I think at least for Mississippi, like felony disenfranchisement is really a misnomer, because like it's not even like by statute, it's like not even that these are necessarily felonies, right? It's like theft is one of the disenfranchising crimes, and it's just like, what does that even mean? And as we kind of talked about as a group, there's nobody in the Secretary of State's office whose job it is to explain this to people, and so I'm curious about the kind of the ambiguities that exist both in terms of process, but then also in the statute itself, in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Jacola, and John Paul.
So yeah, I'll talk about, oh,
go ahead.
It's a
Jacola, I think you have the floor.
Okay, so as far as if there's like a designated person to help with this, absolutely not. We are honestly doing the government's jobs for them. And, you know, we really are trying our best to just get our folks, you know, the help that they need from a grassroots perspective. And what that means is, you know, folks who are reaching out to us, whether, you know, they're just coming out of prison or jail, or if they need support with, you know, rental assistance, what have you, like we're just trying to meet needs. And sometimes people reach out to us about, hey, is this something I can do? Because they are getting the runaround from their local election commission, you know, criminal court clerk's office. And then when you go to the state of Tennessee, you're going against, you know, a huge process that is completely complicated. You got to go to probation and parole to get this part of this filled out. And so it really discourages people, and they don't want to continue getting the runaround or not getting straight answers or not getting a phone call back or having to go to places that have, you know, caused trauma in their lives, whether it be a courthouse or whether it be the probation and parole office, that when they were done with their sentence, they washed their hands with it. You know, people do not want to go back to these places. And these are ways that we have to, you know, really go through to get these forms filled out in the state of Tennessee, because it's required. And so in our state, it's called the Certificate of Restoration, which is required after a certain period of time. In May of 1981, there was a short period of time where nobody in Tennessee lost the right to vote. So we do have people who were convicted of that time, who I have in my own personal family, who have been denied the right to vote, even though they legally still had the right to vote, that Campaign Legal Center had to come in and, you know, combat some of that with the state of Tennessee. And we also have ongoing litigation or arguments that just happened earlier this week. And so we're just trying to use multiple tactics. We use this also as a base building opportunity to introduce people to the work that folks are doing here locally, which is why Campaign Legal Center likes to partner with groups based in their local communities who are already doing this work, and know, you know, what's happening and know the landscape the best. We just want to be able to support that work, the work that's happening. But specifically here in Tennessee, no, there is not a designated person. And I'm sure other states could say the same.
That's right. So I'll start with Alabama. So when in 2017, when the legislator, and it was actually a Republican legislator that legislation that actually passed the Moral Turpitude Act. An interesting thing though was the Secretary of State, John Muir, went on the record and said he was not going to disseminate the information out to the general public. So that led to, like I say, us forming Alabama Voter Rights Project with Campaign Legal Center in order to, one, not only disseminate the information out to individuals that you may not have lost your right to vote, from the definition of Moral Turpitude Act, because they actually created a list of 48 disqualifying convictions. And so if your conviction isn't on that list, you've never lost your right to vote, and that's retroactive. Like they have to, you can just register to vote. If you and one of the highlights I would say in that list is the fact that there are no drug crimes on that list. So drug crimes does not disqualify an individual in Alabama except for trafficking. Trafficking is the only one, but then technically that's even a thing because the statutes read different between the state law and the federal law. And what I've had cases where federally it was a trafficking case, but it didn't meet the state's criteria. But the board of registrars rejected it simply because all they saw was trafficking. They do not do our officials do not do their due diligence, and we have to explain the law to them often, and because they'll just see a certain what the crime is. They don't look at sometimes they don't look at the degree of the crime, because most third degree crimes in the state of Alabama are not disqualified, even if it's theft of property. But if it's in the third degree, you still eligible to vote. But it's that information that a person doesn't know, and then in the process they created what's called the certificate of eligibility to register to vote. Another obstacle that in a piece of paper that the onus is on the individual to fill that out, and that actually goes to the Board of Pardons and Parole. If you meet all the requirements, which one of the requirements is pay all your fines and fees, completed your total sentence, including probation and parole, and don't have any pending felony convictions, right? But if you meet those criteria, you're able to fill out the serve. The state of Alabama is mandated that they have to give you an answer. There's a 45-day window that an individual has to receive the rejection or receive the serve certificate. But then they're responsible for then taking that to the board of registrars, because that doesn't mean you're registered to vote. Certificate just showing that you're eligible to vote, and then you have to take that to the board of registrars and say, hey, yeah, they said I'm eligible to vote. Now you can register to vote. Now the problem with that, and my sister touched on it, a lot of individuals, like, this is where groups like us also fill in the gap, because we can't, literally my job was I'm gonna go with you. I'll go represent you. Giving people the power to really go through the process and filling in them gaps where they need it. Because often, if they just make it through that, if they do make it through with a little help, that's where your leaders are gonna come from, because they're trusting the process. And that's what we've been able to do. Establish Tuscaloosa Rights Restoration Coalition. We have a statewide coalition, the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, that directly came out of a lot of the work that we did as partners in Alabama. But a lot of it still is the lack of education. People don't know, because they're different. Especially there's so much rural areas, and you have to approach those places so much differently, right? It is, and all of us are trying to really figure out how to do that, especially in the time of COVID, right? How to do that thing more effectively. And I know I don't want to talk too much, but Georgia is crazy. It is a crazy place because Georgia has the #1 probation rate in the United States. And they use moral turpitude to disqualify anyone with a felony conviction. So, but part of that is completing your sentence, but then also there's confusion in when you say fines and fees. What do they mean by that? Is it simply just at the time of sentence, but also post sentence. Because what Georgia and many states do not have is a centralized database, right? Where you're actually being able to see how these monies are being applied. And so a lot of individuals, one in they, the average year of probation is 6 years. Nationally, it's 3.5 years, right? So it's almost double people are staying on, and which is the majority of Black people, right? And it's people trying to maneuver through the systems. Because, like I said, you can in the state of Georgia, you can receive what's called a certificate of sentence completion. Now, when you complete your sentence in the state of Georgia, your voting rights are automatically restored. But again, part of that has to be you're finished with the probation part, and that has been one of the most detrimental states of affairs in Georgia, trying to because that's 300 and almost 367,000 people, right? That's affected by this process. And again, there's no step one A B C D E F G process to it. It's collective groups are finally coming together now, trying to all articulate that language to make sure if the state isn't getting it right, we all collectively as groups working together want to be articulating the same language.
Yeah, I do want to connect two dots because I'm not averse to hitting people over the head with information. Drug crimes are not disenfranchising. In Georgia, that's also the case in Mississippi. And why do we think that is?
I believe, well, it's like drug crimes, gun charges, possession of anything. None of those crimes are on the list. And I think it's like that because the list was originally created to disenfranchise Black people in a specific time period. And I personally don't know any Black folks that are stealing trees off anybody's land. Never met one of those people, don't know them. If they were walking down the street, like, sorry to this man, I don't know who that is. But I think the demographic of who's committing certain crimes has also changed in the state of Mississippi. So
right. I just wanted to spell that out for people. It's like, because if you look at like drug convictions, for example, I mean, like the disparities are much, much lower, right? Like there are a lot of white people incarcerated for drug crimes. So let's not take away their rights to vote. But since we are all people living in the South, like none of us might not have the right to vote if it was not for the Voting Rights Act and the federal government, Congress, for better or worse. We had a question, has there ever been conversations about national or federal legislation to address the subject?
So right now, the Freedom to Vote Act actually includes felony convictions in it. That's before the Senate that just went last month. And there's a lot of people, excited about that. But again, that's just federal felony convictions. And so we still have a long way to go. But we absolutely do encourage everyone to support that because that is some movement, especially in the federal system. But we really... on this state level, we have a lot of work to do, especially in the South.
Yeah. So Hannah and I love history, love everything, not everything, but like everything that we dive deep into around these issues. And so academically, the For the People Act is our dream come true, but there are some holes in it, particularly around our rights restoration work and how we see Mississippi votes being central to like all of the work that's happening around that in Mississippi. So the way that it's worded, and I don't want to misquote it, so hop in if I'm messing it up.
I got you.
But the way that it's worded is like, we are thinking that this piece of legislation is going to like help everybody get more access to the polls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is the way that the language is set up around rights restoration. Sounds like it, but folks will only be able to participate in federal elections if they've been convicted of those disenfranchising crimes. It doesn't mean that they can participate in like statewide elections or municipal elections, et cetera. So for us, that's a major problem, because right now in Mississippi, folks who are in pretrial detention, folks who are in prison, who haven't been convicted of any of the disenfranchising crimes can vote. And so we'll talk about that in a second too. But the way that it's mentioned in the For the People Act, it doesn't give people those full rights to be able to participate in each and every election. So, I mean, there's some great things out there in Congress right now around expanding access, and, Mississippi's Congress folks aren't necessarily on board with any of those things, but we're making sure that, one, people have all the information to like add to what is already being presented to protect the rights of folks who are already in prison, already in pretrial detention, and fully restore the rights of folks who served their time and who should otherwise have their suffrage restored. So,
and just to add like a little bit more, I guess you can say, like, perspective on the situation. I know, Ariel, you mentioned earlier that it's the 11% for us,
right?
And that's only roughly 200,000 people. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, Mississippi only has 3 million people in the entire state's population. 230,000 people can change an election in literally all 82 counties in this entire state.
Right.
Yes, it's double Jackson. So, that's why it's very important for that 11% to still have access to municipal and, local, county, all of the things, state, outside of just federal elections.
And I just want to add, and in Tennessee, just for numbers wise, it's 421,000 people. And so we know, just as Mississippi Votes just pointed out, that could totally shift so many things on the local and statewide level and federal level coming from the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really important work happening on the policy level, both at the federal level, state level. I know you all are involved in this, but if you all could just talk about like why it's also important to directly engage people for Mississippi Votes, for example. I know it's young folks and directly impacted people, but particularly people in my business tend to get caught up in like the fights on Capitol Hill. So if you could just talk about like why it's important, what it means to engage with people in communities on the ground around this work.
I'll start and say, I think one of the number one things is trust. To really being on the ground, you really find not just the law, but you understand the nuances that individuals are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And then if you walking with them and not trying to be their savior, but you're walking with them and learning with them, that's where the trust comes in. And then because we're all learning in this space, I think that opens the door for individuals to really feel like you're for them and not using you as a prop. A lot of this, I think, for all three groups, I can honestly say, in working with everyone, like I need to be able to leave you better than how I came in, meaning supplying you with the knowledge to fight your own cause, win your own. So being on the ground, like that's where you at. You're gonna get the trust, you're gonna get the buy-in, and because all these things, none of these things were created overnight, and just because I mean, we've been changing laws, right? We've been changing laws, but if the people don't know what the laws are, then I ain't gonna say they pointless, but
I can go next.
For sure.
So at Campaign Legal Center, I actually got introduced to Campaign Legal Center because I was organizing with Free Hearts, which is my political home still here in Tennessee, which is the group I mentioned earlier. And every single woman who was a part of staff or volunteered, who was formerly incarcerated, none of my friends had their voting rights. None of them, including our executive director. And it was just something that so many people, even my uncle, would reach out to me and be like, "Hey, Cola, how can I get my voting rights back?" And I was like, "I want to learn this law. Like, I want to learn about this so I can share this knowledge with my community." And that's really where it started for me, was just my inner circles. And so from there, I think it's all about credibility. So once, I had helped my uncle get his voting rights back and my homegirl get her voting rights back, people are like, "Oh, okay, so this is actually a thing. You're not just talking. We can actually do this." And even though the process is absolutely horrible, it's about building power. And so what we have been trying to do is use this as a tactic to base build with our people who are impacted by incarceration, by felony convictions across the board, as Jean Paul noted earlier, whether they have been incarcerated or not, if they've been on probation, because that is a huge voting block. It's a huge block of power. And so that's what we have really, concentrated on here in Tennessee specifically. And Campaign Legal Center has really taken this model and has been investing in other groups across the country who is specifically working on voter restoration work. And as John Paul mentioned earlier, COVID was a huge knock to being able to base build. You can't go out and canvas. And so what we did was support folks to do digital campaigns, which we're still doing, texting folks, calling folks, having conversations with our people to figure out, how we can get them through the process. And during that process, that's absolutely when we see all the nuances and we see what we actually are up against, and we see the huge flaws in the laws that exist. And so we can take that and take our people to the legislature when we're in session and say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense in real life, y'all," And so those are some of the things that we use. And again, just multiple tactics, from litigation to policy, to base building. Like we're just trying to be as creative as possible and use all the tools in our toolbox to really be able to meet our folks' needs, to really be able to push back on some of these horrible, laws that's clearly and historically meant to disenfranchise us. So those are some of the things that we're doing here in the state of Tennessee. Really very proud of the work that is being done all across the South in this area. And I really love how we're linking arms to really push back. And I'm just super grateful to be in the work with all the people here.
I think for me personally, it's important that we are in and on the ground with this information, because one, there's just a lack of information anyways. There's a lack of knowledge. There's like an education about the situation. There are people who have no idea that we have 23 disenfranchised crimes. There are people who have no idea that they are eligible to vote, even with whatever felony conviction they have that's not on that list. And I have the opportunity to meet a lot of these folks and talk to a lot of these folks face to face, one-on-one, wherever they are, in the grocery store, in the library, or, downtown, walking down the street. I have opportunity to talk to these people. And once they either hear that, you can either have your rights restored or you were never disenfranchised, that's when the questions start coming. Mm-hmm. Because now they have questions for other people. Now they want information that they can go back and share in their communities with folks who may be battling or know more people or family members that may be going through something very similar. And it's also important to get the people involved who don't have any felony convictions, because until we can get the 11% rights restored, that the other percent, what is that, like 90, 80, 89, the other 89%, those are the folks who, up until we didn't have a ballot initiative process, were the folks who would go. Those are the folks who would have to go to the polls to change the laws if we get our ballot initiative process back. But also, those are the people who can march hand in hand with the folks who have been convicted to the Capitol. Those are also people who can call their legislators and demand that something has happened, demand that the process is made clear, demand that they pass some type of legislation. Like, there is power in numbers in politics, because it's supposed to be a democracy, right? The people are supposed to tell our leaders how we want to be led. And if everyday folks don't even know what's happening around rights restoration, don't know how they're affected, don't know if they have a family member that's affected, how can we ever expect to come to a solution or a common ground or any type of anything? Like, this is a collective effort from every person in the state of Mississippi to get these folks back where they are supposed to be, which was with their birth-given right, and that's to vote. That's not a citizen, right?
Yeah.
And actually, no, Arika, I was going to say, go ahead and talk about the ballot initiative issue, because as we discussed before, I mean, like, the groups doing this work, like, are under assault, and in a lot of different ways, and it looks different in every place, and like, they try to make it seem like it's innocuous. Talk about the ballot initiative process in Mississippi, and like what that's meant for the work of Mississippi Votes, but then other folks who are working to not just expand the franchise, but in some ways to counteract or counterbalance the legislature here.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Before I go there, I want to also just name that the work that each of our organizations and so many organizations across the Deep South are doing in building this momentum for mass movement is how we get free, how we envision true liberation in our democratic processes. And so without the will of the people, without people being able to see themselves as part of the process and a part of the solution and a part of like the leadership that we're building, because it ain't just about how cute me and Hannah, Jacola, and John Paul are out front and doing whatever. It's about making sure that folks feel empowered to stand in their truth and to talk through how this is not affecting just them individually, but their families and everybody and everything connected to them, right? So like that is, and then the ballot initiative process was for Mississippi at least, a people-driven vehicle for us to be able to use the ballot as a way for folks who are in community with and who love on the folks who have been disenfranchised to use that process as a way to help restore the 11% that we keep naming their rights to vote. So in the spring, was it March?
It was May 14th.
May 14th, Hannah's got a vivid memory. Our ballot initiative process got struck down by the Supreme Court. And I have my theories on how and why that happened, but I'm going to let Hannah talk about the ballot initiative process.
So the ballot initiative process was taken from us through a constitutional loophole that is also linked to our census and our congressional districts. So in 2001, when they redrew all the district lines, we lost a congressional seat. We went from 5 districts to 4 districts, but our Constitution names that to have a ballot initiative, to be in the process of creating a ballot initiative to put on the ballot, you have to collect a certain number of signatures equal to those 5 districts. Well, they redrew the map lines. We have 4 districts. We just threw it in the back burner. Nobody was thinking about it because we've had things passed since then, like the voter ID situation. We've had, of course, our flag. We had some Jim Crow law stuff get pulled out of the Constitution, and of course, medicinal marijuana was just passed last year's election. All those things passed without consequence. Namely, Initiative 65, the medicinal marijuana thing, passed with 71% of the entire state's votes. But because
The math wasn't math.
the math wasn't mathing, because there's no way we could collect this certain percentage of signatures in 5 districts because we didn't have 5 districts anymore. That was the only initiative that was overturned out of everything that has passed since 2005, I think.
11.
So
Is it 5 or 11? The voter ID was 11.
that was 11.
Yeah.
Okay. Since 2011, nothing else was overturned. Just Initiative 65, just the medicinal marijuana, and
why was that?
So with that has also completely put a stop to everything that many organizations across the state have had going on. There was a group doing some stuff around Medicare, and it was ready to go. Signatures were collected, paperwork was approved. Next statewide election, that thing was going to be on the ballot. That's just what it was. There's somebody right now that's on the ground, still collecting signatures, still having their ducks in a row for some voter expansion work. And then there was us and our work that we were initiating. We're still in the research phases of it, which is very important to any ballot initiative process. So we think that it's very relevant to still do what we're doing. But we were going to put rights restoration on the ballot because, that 11% that we keep naming. And literally, as soon as our survey went out, the Supreme Court said, never mind. And because it's a privilege and not a right, it's not named in our Constitution. Technically, the Supreme Court doesn't have to do anything else about it. Technically, our legislature doesn't have to do anything else about it. But we know that we have allies in the legislature who understand that this is a very important part of democracy and a very important part of how things can function in Mississippi, who are trying to brainstorm and figure out what are we going to do. So fingers crossed for 2022 legislative session. But that's where we are right now. Everybody is pretty much twiddling their thumbs because we don't really know what to do with any of our projects.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the reason I asked is because, one, there's the conversation that we need to have about the tools that are being taken away from us. And so before we get into questions, if we could kind of go around and let people what do you need, either in terms of tools, resources. Hannah, you talked about how to engage with the folks who are not affected, or the need for people who are not affected to be involved. And so if each of you has kind of to have this person or this institution as an ally in this work, who would it be? What would kind of the pitch be that you would make to them to get involved? I know less about Tennessee, so Jacola, who would that be there?
Well, I think that a lot of things going on in Tennessee could easily be resolved, especially by changing and eliminating this certificate of restoration process. That could easily be done by our legislature. And again, it takes, outside of Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, Knoxville, the big major cities. And so what we really need is rural organizers. We need rural Tennessee. We need legislatures and folks who have been present legislatures in their cities to, work together. So we can really move the needle, because it's hard. I mean, we have a supermajority Republican legislature. It's difficult to do anything. Nashville and Memphis can't do anything by themselves. And so it's really going to take folks all across the state working together. Our partner, Free Hearts, has a Free the Vote coalition that they just launched. They put up legislation last year, and Campaign Legal Center testified on behalf. But it's just very difficult. And so that's what we really need, is to just combine efforts and to really, really, really push in rural areas of Tennessee. We also have a lot of work being done and tools being used on our free resource at Campaign Legal Center, which is restoreyourvote.org. That has been like super helpful. And because, as explained, there's so much misinformation, we need everybody to really share these resources that all of the groups have mentioned on this call. Free Hearts has been paying fines and fees. They lost their fines and fees fund from the work that our brothers and sisters in Florida did to try to, overcome some of these barriers. But we don't want to pay the state all of this money. Like we that's not what we want to do. And so I think with some of these efforts, and not just kind of going for crumbs and really like going hard together can really get us what we need. So that's what I would say for the state of Tennessee.
All of that right there. That's in all of my states. Literally that part, right? Particularly, let's say the rural areas. But one of the things I have found helpful in the state of Alabama that I'm trying to use for the other areas is working more with like public health departments in those rural areas to have access. And so I have success in Alabama doing that. So I've been trying to, figure out how to do that in my other states as well. But some of the processes are different. So.
Thanks for that. I do want to. We have one question, but I do want to leave folks with some information, both about about our organizations, but then also like the resources that you have. Anybody who like the millions and millions of people are watching this, if they can go to MississippiVotes.org. What's on your website that they can kind of plug into to get involved? In Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. We'll start with Mississippi Votes.
Thanks, Ryan. There are a number of resources on our website for folks who've been directly impacted by any of the 23 disenfranchising crimes. Hannah mentioned earlier that we digitized the rights restoration application. You can find it at msvotes.org / policy and research. And on that page, there's a ton of information. It lists the 23 disenfranchising crimes. There's a list of your local representatives and senators, and it teaches you all about the rights restoration process. It has tons of videos and FAQs and just different things you can interact with. And always, if any of that stuff is confusing, email us, holler at us, you can call us, and all of our contact information is on the website. I think in regard to what we need more allies. We need more partners across the Deep South to uplift this work, because this isn't unique to Mississippi. We absolutely set the precedent for all of this madness in 1890.
Sorry.
Our bad. However, all of our work is linked and tied together, and it just makes a heck of a difference when all of us are doing the work together. So that's why we're in deep partnership with folks in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Campaign Legal Center, Free Hearts. Jacola made that connection for us, and SPLC. So, yeah. And I also want to uplift that we are developing, Hannah and I developing some, what we're calling the 1890 Project, where we're exposing all of what happened from start to finish in layman's terms, not big academic knowledge or words, but breaking down the process and going from 1890 to now, and also using this vehicle as a political education tool for folks who are going to be a part of our fellowship program that we hope to partner with SPLC on. So just wanted to name that.
Dope.
I can go next.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so for Campaign Legal Center, I'm going to say this all the time, everywhere I go. RestoreYourVote.org is a great tool. It helps people figure out if they are eligible, wherever they are, wherever they have been convicted of their felonies, which as we have talked about, is very, very complicated. These laws are intentionally complicated. So that's what I wanted to plug there. And for Tennesseans specifically, Free Hearts, you can find them at freeheartsorg.com, is leading the work, and our partner in the work in Tennessee, who's doing amazing. They actually have 9 fellows right now who they have trained, also working on jail voting issues, which is another form of disenfranchisement, as many other people on this call is working on. And so those are some resources that can really help specifically for folks in Tennessee and across the South. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And specifically for SPLC, go to SPLcenter.org /voting rights. And it has all of our issues, not just voter restoration, but all the voting rights issues and cases projects we have, cases that we have ongoing. You can also do tell your story there. You can see about our grant program, the Vote Your Voice program, which is a granting program surrounding voting rights. And we still have the AlabamaVotingRights.com still up too.
Awesome. We have about 4 minutes for questions. There was a question about recidivism in legislation. I don't know if it was specific. It's how does recidivism rates affect the legislation, presumably referring to proposed federal legislation. Or maybe it doesn't. Ponder that. Do we have any other questions?
Say it again.
Oh, I guess the question came up when we were talking about proposed federal legislation. Someone asked, how does recidivism affect it, if at all? Or recidivism rates?
Okay. I personally, in my conversation with legislators, I haven't heard anything about recidivism rates affecting any type of legislation. So I'm not sure if there is an effect or not. I'm more than likely sure that there probably is for some folks in some folks' minds, but those particular legislators I have not had conversations with. So
to Hannah's point, like, they're when we turn in the applications for suffrage to whatever committee, like it's up to the committee chair whether and so sometimes different factors do play a part, but that's our problem, right? We don't know which factors play a part. There is no clear indication ever about what folks are looking at, because we've heard several different versions of that tale that have said, because it was this crime, this person didn't go through, or because they've been or because this person has been convicted multiple times and like didn't go to their whatever. Like, people come up with stuff, but there is nothing clear to indicate how or what affects people's suffrage applications going through. So.
And I would just add, in Tennessee, it doesn't affect the legislation specifically, but it does affect the process. It makes it harder because you have to get a certificate of restoration for every single felony conviction. So if you have multiple ones, that just makes it more difficult and makes people just want to throw up their hands. But again, intentionally complicated.
Yeah. And see, we don't have that, which is weird, right? Like, we've talked often about like how there should be a blanket process across the country. Like, if we're going to do this, like, what is it? Right. Tell us what it is so that we can properly educate folks, because it gets complicated as you go state to state. And it's just really insane how we continuously
don't know what's going on.
Right. And keep people out of the process.
I understand we have a comment.
Okay.
That might be a good way to wrap us up. Someone said, I've recently returned to South Carolina. Feeling like an underdog can drain energy so bad. Good to be heard by fellow progressives. So, you know, the work that y'all are doing is obviously reverberating both in the communities that you're working on throughout your state, but then even, you know, beyond state borders and hopefully to folks who attended our panel. We're at 1 o'clock, so I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panelists. I think everybody who tuned in should, you know, log onto your websites, figure out how to support, donate, share. Hopefully people were tweeting like crazy about it. And like Arika said, let's get free, y'all. Thanks.